the middleweight town. Had no idea what kind of shit was about to go down.
Geology. Geology. This is Daniel Minizini, your inquisitive geologist here in KPFT HD channel in Houston, Montrose, headquarters of our beloved radio KPFT. We're here today and we're gonna talk with Brandt Mannchen. Brandt represents an association, well, let's say he's part of an association. A big one is the part of the Sierra Club. And Brandt is gonna talk about hurricanes, and you know something about hurricanes. Lately it happened one in the city, another one in Florida, and many others along the Gulf Coast. There are others around the globe, and we're going to talk about them, and we're going to approach them with a different point of view. So Brandt is here today because he's going to talk about the point of view of approaching natural disasters that is different from the mainstream. So I would like to welcome now Brandt. Hi, Brandt. How's it doing?
How are you, Daniel?
I'm doing pretty fine, Brandt. And I'm very glad that you accept my invitation. It was a long time that I tried to catch you. And finally, you're here.
It took a while.
Yes, here we are. So, Brandt, do you want to give us a very short overview of the Sierra Club first? And what is your role in the Sierra Club?
Sure. For those who aren't familiar with the Sierra Club, we're a pretty old organization. We were formed in 1892, and one of our founding members was John Muir. And originally the club was focused on California and the Sierra Nevada mountain range. And over the time, the Sierra Club has expanded its interests to all across the U.S. as well as around the world. So we're what I would call an environmental conservation organization. And what that means is we're interested in air and water pollution. We're interested in parks. Our biggest focus right now is climate change, and also how do we shift from the energy sort of view that we're at right now into something that will assist the climate instead of making the climate worse. And where I stand in all that sort of thing is I'm with the Houston Regional Group of the Sierra Club. We have about 5,000 members in the Houston area, and we're part of the Lone Star chapter of the Sierra Club, which is basically the state of Texas. And then, of course, there's the Sierra Club nationally, which has offices in Oakland and also in Washington, D.C., and some regional offices scattered across the U.S. So we lobby Congress or the mayor or county commissioners or state legislature or whoever. We educate. We have monthly meetings. We have an active outings program. So if you want to find out what's around Houston that's beautiful and a way to get outdoors, we can help show you that. We've got a meetup site. So
I need a kind of a Cicero that helps me to go and see what are the beauties of this swamp.
You need to, because there's a lot of beautiful places out there. And so I am for the Houston Regional Group, I am the chair of the Forestry Subcommittee. I'm also the Forest Management Chair for the Lone Star chapter. So I'm involved basically in federal public lands that deal with forest, and that could be for instance, there are 4 national forests in the state of Texas. There are national wildlife refuges that have beautiful forests called the Columbia Bottomlands. There are also a Big Thicket National Preserve that the National Park Service manages. And so those are the kinds of areas that I get involved with in trying to do citizen oversight and trying to track and see what's happening and trying to provide input, trying to get our public lands managed in a better way.
Brandt, when did you join the Sierra Club?
I joined the Sierra Club in January of 1977, so that was 41 years ago.
All right. So you probably wrote the mission.
No, I did not write the mission, and I'm not even going to pretend I did. But.
Well, actually, I ask you that here because you certainly are going to be able to explain it. So the mission says that Sierra Club protects and conserves the natural resources of the state of Texas and the United States and the world.
Right.
And also the mission is to educate the people to the need to preserve and restore the quality of the environment and the integrity of the ecosystems. So I would like to start from the basics.
Sure, and to have fun doing that.
All right. Yeah.
Because, one of the purposes of our outings program is to get out and enjoy nature, but also when we connect with nature, we start to see that we have an impact on nature and nature has an impact on us. And so we both need to work together, work with nature, not against nature.
And so, also it's difficult to keep up with the volunteers if they don't have fun, right?
You got to have fun,
We know something here at KPFT. And so let's start from the basic. How would you define the natural resources? What are those natural resources that we want to protect and conserve?
Well, in the Houston area, obviously, we all breathe, so clean air is really important. We all like clean, pure water to drink, so we want to have a watershed that provides us with clean water that we can use to drink and for other purposes, maybe industrial purposes or whatever, and sufficient supplies, obviously. In 2011, the drought showed us kind of what can happen, not just here, but all across Texas. And in some places in Texas right now appear to be back in drought again, so water is really important. Wildlife resources. For the Sierra Club, we believe that, we love humans, but we've got a whole bunch of other critters in this beautiful, beautiful, fabulous, amazing world. And so those critters and that vegetation are really special, and so we want to see those areas, those species protected. In addition, we want to have parks. We want to have places where we can relax and take it easy. We want to have places where we can safely put some of the waste that we generate and hopefully even recycle or reuse some of those waste. That's why we were glad to see that the city of Houston is back to recycling. Glass and other things. So that's good.
So, when you say protect,
yes,
protect from mankind or protect also from other natural phenomena? Because some of the elements that you mentioned, air, water, wildlife, they may be threatened also by other natural phenomena. So is it protection against the actions of man or protections against other natural phenomena like fires or,
Well, remember, a lot of those fires, for instance, in Sam Houston National Forest, which is about 50 miles north of us, somewhere in 80 to 90% of the fires that occur there are human created. In other words, we start them. And also they have these are like somebody has a campfire or somebody throws a match down or whatever the heck it is. In addition, they do prescribed burning, which we support. Because prescribed fire is a natural part of the ecosystem. It's one of those natural ecological processes, and we've sort of wiped it off the face of the earth in many places. And Houston area is one of them. Used to be we had prairies that responded to fire. We had different kinds of forests that responded to fire. So fire is not necessarily a bad thing, but the Sierra Club's big focus is on what we can do to educate people so that we can do things better so that our impacts on the natural environment are less. And so that protection is basically focused on those our actions and what we can do to make them less harmful.
I like the example that you brought up about the fire because that exemplifies your new point of view completely out of the mainstream. So fires are good. And the natural fires, in a sense, they give good products to nature.
Well, a lot of the fires that you read about, especially in the West, where you have very, very large fires, part of the reason that they're burning as they're burning is because we have not allowed natural fires to burn and therefore use up the fuel. And because of that, you have fuel buildup. And what I mean by fuel is leaves and branches and things from trees and shrubs and whatever that dies and falls to the ground. And so periodically in many places in the natural world, before we sort of interfered with that, the fires came through periodically, and some of them were crown fires that killed trees. A lot of them were what we would call creeping ground fires that basically just burned maybe 3 or 4 feet up and along the ground and sort of cleaned the floor and allowed a lot of vegetation to come up after the fire comes through, because in addition to opening it up, you also provide a fertilizer, because when you burn the woody material, you leave behind an ash that's very rich in minerals and nutrients that plants need. So this was a natural process, and in many places of the West, we have stopped that process. So what happens is 10, 20 years, no fires, because we've put them all out, and then bingo, we have a lightning strike and the fire gets out of control, and it's this conflagration, and we go, oh my gosh, this is terrible. But in reality, nature's kind of rebalancing the books, so to speak. And so from Sierra Club's viewpoint, fires are a natural part of many ecosystems, and they're not necessarily bad. Part of the thing that makes them difficult is that people want to move into fire-prone areas. When they move into fire-prone areas and build their house, it's really hard for firefighters to get in there to protect them and their house without also perhaps putting the firefighters in danger. And also it costs an incredible amount of money. The U.S. Forest Service budget has been eaten up by fighting these fires in the West as they've had to fight more and more and more. And their budget for other things like perhaps wildlife or for water quality or other things has been focused on fires. And so if we will allow and work with nature, because prescribed burning now, they do it up in Sam Houston National Forest and Big Thicket National Preserve and also on the coast in the National Wildlife Refuges. You kind of put that fire back in there so to let it sort of do the thing it used to do. And what you see is a response that the wildlife and the vegetation is like, yeah, we're used to this. This is good for us. We like it. Let's do this some more, right?
And beyond the fires, can you tell us what is the status of the environment in Houston and in Texas, so in the Gulf Coast at large? Is it healthy? What are the main problems that we have or that we are facing and that you in the Sierra Club you are following closely?
One of the things I might suggest that the folks who are listening go to is the Galveston Bay Foundation has a report card for Galveston Bay, and they rank different issues and say, are we an A or a B or C or D or whatever. That might be an initial place where people can look. From my perspective, I'm a native Houstonian. I've lived here almost my entire life. I grew up here. And let's start with air. Air is, in many cases, better than it used to be. I used to be an air quality investigator for the city of Houston, and a lot of the visible emissions are gone. When I first got involved in the mid to late 70s, you could see a whole lot of black smoke everywhere.
When did it improve?
It improved gradually, probably over several decades, because in part the Federal Clean Air Act, okay, this is our nation's federal law, required that states deal with pollution in various places like big cities like Houston. And so over time, we got cleaner cars because the federal government said, hey, Detroit, you need to reduce what's coming out of the tailpipe. We got cleaner refineries because when we exceeded the ozone standard, which ozone is something that's good way up in the stratosphere because it helps protect us.
We don't want to create
But
holes.
Down here, it's not so good, and so it is a respiratory irritant, and so we exceeded the health standard for ozone. And so the U.S. EPA said to the state of Texas, said, hey, you need to do something about that. And so what the state of Texas did was said, okay, first we got to figure out where our the air pollution that creates ozone, where's it coming from? So they found that out, and then they basically developed some regulations and rules that said, okay, industry, for instance, you got a storage tank, right? And it doesn't have any sort of way to prevent the organic chemicals from evaporating from that storage tank, so put a lid on it, or put a floating cover or whatever it is. And also when I don't know if you ever watch trucks when they pull into gas stations and they're dropping a load of gas. I don't know if you noticed there's several hoses. One of them is the product hose, which is dropping the gas. The other is the vapor recovery hose. So it takes the vapors inside the underground tank where the gasoline is and stores them in the truck, and the truck goes back to the processing plant and either flares that or compresses that and turns it back into gasoline.
Good. So air is good. Let's say
air is better. Air is better.
Not good enough.
Right. Water's better too, but we have a big problem with bacteria. Bacteria is one of our biggest water pollutants. It seems like everywhere we urbanize and we start to create impervious surface, concrete in watersheds, lots of things wash off into the streams, and we seem to get high bacteria levels. And so individual sewage treatment plants are doing a whole lot better job today than they were several decades ago.
How do we do if we want to check the quality of the water that comes out from our tap at home?
The tap water is the city of Houston. You have like sewage water, right, which is processed by sewage treatment plants, and then that effluent is what they call it, goes into the river. But then you have drinking water. And drinking water, our drinking water comes from several places. It comes from Lake Houston, it comes from Lake Livingston, and it comes from underground. Used to be back in the 70s, we got 70% of our water from underground and 30% from surface, which means lakes. That's totally flipped. And now it's 70% comes from surface and 30% from underground. And the reason for that is a geological reason. We were sinking. We were pulling up so much groundwater, and also pulling up oil and gas too, for that matter, but it was mostly groundwater, that we literally, the ground was sinking. It's called subsidence.
Yes.
And so, and you may have talked about this on your program before, but we got a subsidence district from the legislature back in 1975, I think it was. And over time, they have required that everybody, City of Houston, Humboldt, wherever, has to switch to surface water, or mostly switch to surface water. And because of that, we have totally flipped where our water comes from, and the subsidence has decreased considerably. In some places, it's almost doesn't exist. In other places, it's slowed down a whole lot. And I don't know if you've heard of the Loose Biodiversion Project, but the City of Houston is starting construction of this huge, huge canal pipeline system that's going to go from the Trinity River to Lake Houston to provide additional water for southern Montgomery County, northern Harris County, central Harris County, and western Harris County.
Drinking water?
It'll eventually be drinking water. They bring 400 million gallons a day, eventually, to the water purification plant at Lake Houston, and then it will be purified and put into pipes that will eventually go to your house and come out of the tap.
So the water from the tap is okay today?
The water from the tap, as far as we know, is in good shape.
Do you check it? Do you bring waters to the labs?
I don't check it. I just drink it.
Still alive.
So that's our drinking water.
So air is better, water is good. What else do we have in Texas?
Well, we have a lot of wastes, and some are called hazardous waste. Some are called solid waste. And solid waste is what the city or whoever picks up in front of your house. It's the garbage that you generate as you eat and do whatever it is you do, and that's usually taken to a special landfill. And when I say special, I mean in this way. Used to be landfills were basically a hole in the ground and you threw stuff in them, and we called them dumps. And then back in the 70s, it was decided that this isn't good enough, because if you do that, you're liable to get leakage and then it goes into the groundwater, and therefore we pump up the groundwater and we drink it, and that's not good. So what they did was they required landfills to be built in a certain way, and that certain way includes layers of impervious clay, and it could be clay that already exists, or it could be clay that you bring in and just, compress and put down. Then you put in like some membranes, impermeable membranes, and a lot of the systems also have methane monitoring and even extraction systems. So, you can imagine putting all that garbage under soil, and all the bacteria start doing their thing, and they generate methane. At the McCarty Road landfill that I think Waste Management owns, and I think this is still the case. I used to inspect a company that was right next to the McCarty Road landfill. What that company did was the McCarty Road landfill sent them the dirty methane gas from the landfill. This company cleaned up the methane, put it in a gas pipeline, and took it off so that you could use it to cook your food or do whatever you want. So a lot of landfills have those kinds of things. Sometimes they don't have those systems, but a lot of them have methane monitoring systems now. And also they try and monitor the groundwater, near these landfills, make sure that there's no leakage from them. So, and then we have hazardous waste. And with hazardous waste, there's different ways to treat those. Sometimes you can sort of pull some of the chemicals out and reuse them, kind of recycle them. Sometimes those chemicals are so dirty that you might burn them. Sometimes you might say, the best thing to do is put these in a drum and put them in a hazardous waste landfill, which has even more safeguards than a regular municipal landfill that we were just talking about, and we're just going to kind of let them sit there. So it just kind of depends. There's a lot of waste streams, and some of them are easy to recycle. Like now that the mayor and city council have restarted recycling, some of those waste streams where people, pull out plastic and pull out glass and pull out whatever it is they pull out and set it on the sidewalk in the green bins or whatever they have.
We're going to have a big problem pretty soon now with the waste of the batteries, right? We are moving into a world that needs to store the energy, and
right.
So all the entrepreneurs and companies that are trying to create long-lived batteries. But what will happen to those batteries
exactly
when they are used? That's going to be a problem.
And there are already, I forgot the commercial name, but there's some commercial facilities where you can go in and get a battery for your camera or your phone or whatever it is, and they will take your battery and they will send it back, and it will be recycled or in some way handled in a safe manner. But unfortunately, right now there's not a whole lot of incentive for people to do that. A lot of people take their little battery out and throw it in the trash can and then go get a new one.
No.
And that's not what you should do, because a lot of those batteries have from two aspects. The materials can be very hazardous, but the other thing is those materials are very valuable too, because you can take those materials, extract them, and reform them into other batteries or other products. And so it's to our benefit to implement a recycling program for batteries, all types of batteries, and to make sure that we don't create what they call a heavy metal problem.
Do you think that are we ready as a society to receive all of these batteries? I'm thinking just about cars. Just think about the electric cars. Let's hope that we'll have electric cars in the future. What's going to happen when they are old and you have to dismiss the batteries?
Right. Well, my hope, and I'm not an expert on this, is that the companies will take those batteries back because they have value, and also because the company may have some liability just leaving the battery out there.
So it's a combination of liability and also market value.
Yeah, and if you go out and you mine, let's say lithium or whatever these batteries have, nickel or cadmium or something, it's really expensive. not only is it really expensive, it is one of the most environmentally damaging type of processes that we have. Not only do we dig it up and blow it up and do all these kinds of things, but a lot of times there's acid associated via water, via these minerals being here, and you get a lot of water pollution. So the best thing for us is to recycle as much as we can, because then we don't have to go and mine as much. And
you talk about mining, not to mention the rare earth elements.
Yes.
Which, as their name says, they are rare in the sense that within a volume you have only parts per million, if not parts per billion, of that rare earth element in that volume of rock. So that means that the mining to find a reasonable amount for commercial purposes is going to be spectacular. You're going to have to mine humongous volumes to find out the right amount of rare earth elements.
And it's a social issue, too, from the standpoint, a lot of these are found in Africa or other places, and there's a lot of times there's a lot of conflict involved around these minerals or in the countries where these minerals are, and so you get situations where people
conflicts for the mineral rights?
For the minerals, but also conflict just going on, and people go, oh, well, if I can pull some of this out and sell some of this, maybe I can eat, or my family can eat, or whatever. And then you've got bigger people who say, give me all your stuff for cheap, and then I'm going to make a lot of money, right? So there's a whole lot of negative connotations with digging up rare earths or other types of metals in Africa and in other countries that we don't even think about a lot of times. But there's a lot of violence and other things that we certainly don't want to encourage at all. And so, from the Sierra Club standpoint, it's better to reuse, recycle, do the best we can. And the more you take out of that landfill, okay, building a landfill is very expensive nowadays. Just finding a place where you can do it is really hard, because who wants to live next to a landfill, right? I mean, I wouldn't want to live next to a landfill, and certainly the people who on McCarty Road and other places who live next to landfills, they don't appreciate it. So if you can make your landfill last longer, you save a whole lot of money. And one of the ways you do that is by pulling out waste streams and using those and turning those into products and recycling those so that they don't go into landfill, so the landfill doesn't fill up as soon, and so you don't have to sit there and go, we got to spend $500 million to get a landfill, or whatever the cost may be.
So Texas has a hurricane-prone coast.
Yes.
In the words hurricane or tropical storm have a bad connotation.
Or whatever you want to call it.
They bring back memories, especially here, of rivers surging in floodplains,
sure,
high winds, broken trees, roofless houses, intense rains, and flooded streets and houses. So, in general, human misery, injury, and as we know in here also, loss of life, right? And we try to fight against these natural phenomena, the hurricanes or tropical storms, doing something to contrast them, like dredging out rivers or widening them, building dikes, building taller seawalls. But today, here with you, I like to talk about stepping back to understand the large natural storms, that they have their place in the coastal human and natural ecosystem. So there are positive effects of these tropical storms or hurricanes. So instead of fighting against nature, you propose to work with nature. And I know this because I read a short document that you sent me. And I like it because this document is titled Living by the Rules of the Sea. And I would like you to explain this philosophy, if you will, of living by the rules of the sea at large, not necessarily related to Texas and the Gulf of Mexico coast.
Sure. Well, when I put together on behalf of the Sierra Club this article you're talking about, I unapologetically plagiarized like crazy from all kinds of people. One of them being Dr. John Anderson from Rice University, where you're working too.
Hi, John. By the way, you're not plagiarism because you wrote everything. The bibliography and the references are right. So
I found a book, and this book I think is a wonderful book. It's actually was done in the mid-'90s, and it's called Living by the Rules of the Sea, and it's by David Bush, Orrin Pilkey Jr., and William J. Neal. And I read it, and I said, gee, these things kind of make sense, you know? I mean, why aren't we kind of like using them as our principles of what we should be doing about hurricanes and erosion and accretion and all that kind of stuff? So what I did was I put together this paper, and there are 10 rules of the sea, and what I'd like to do is just go over those for your listeners and just go down the list here. I don't have them memorized, so you have to forgive me.
The living by the rules of the sea.
Yes.
They, who are they for? For the society at large?
Yes. Yeah. And what the people said in this book, they said, look, we don't think it's necessarily a wonderful idea to live right next to the ocean, but if you're going to do that, then here's some basic rules that you might follow, that you might implement in your planning for your city or for your county or your state or whatever, or even for your own self, so that you will be in a better place and be safer than just simply plopping your house down on the shoreline and hoping that everything will be okay. So here are the 10 rules that we think would be good to live by. First one is the coastal zone is unique, and which means you're going to have to look at it from a management perspective that's unique. In other words, it's not simply do the same things that we do with everything else. Second, there are coastal physical processes. And some of those are erosion and accretion, and there's wind-blown erosion called aeolian, and then there's hurricane erosion like washover areas and things like that. So you want to look at your and this book was focusing on barrier islands and barrier peninsulas. So they said, give it a perspective of looking at the whole island, not just at some little portion of it when you're talking about these coastal processes. And then when you look at what property damage potential is, that's always site-specific, because it really depends specifically on what you have on your property, how it's built, what your lifestyle is, that sort of thing.
So you shouldn't focus just on a specific site.
You should, when you're looking at your property damage potential, you are looking specifically at a certain location or site versus a whole island. When you're looking at the whole island, you're looking at the physical processes that are part of that whole island and create it and form it and shape it and do that sort of thing. Then you have property damage mitigation. Now, when you talk about property damage mitigation versus property damage potential is site-specific. Mitigation is look at the whole island. Look at what's happening on the whole island and how you might mitigate your damage to property. Then you look at relative risk areas, and you try to figure out some well-defined criteria of what the risk is for these areas. Then you look at coastal hazard evaluation and mitigation from the standpoint of we have a rising sea level. It seems like every month or every couple of months I see another article that talks about, Antarctica and Greenland and the glaciers and all these places where you have lots of ice, lots of snow, they are melting faster than we've ever seen. And scientists keep updating and saying, well, you know what, the sea level rise we thought was going to be this, but now we think it's maybe this plus X and Y. So that keeps going up and up and up. And so we need to consider in everything we do that sea level is rising, and it's going to keep rising for quite a while. Then we need to look at where development's already occurred and repair any alterations to the environment that have already occurred. So in other words, if we've done some damage, let's mitigate that damage at that development, that location. Then we need to conserve sand, we need to conserve vegetation, and we need to conserve landforms. And when I say landforms, what I mean is, on Galveston Island, for instance, you have a beach, you have dunes, you have saltwater wetlands and various other wetlands. These are all part of landforms. And so if you can conserve sand, conserve vegetation, and conserve landforms, you're way ahead in protecting yourself with regard to hurricanes and their impacts. Because one thing people don't know is that barrier islands move, and they're supposed to move. The reason they move is it's sort of a geomorphic process whereby if that barrier island is going to stay above sea level as it rises, it needs to move toward the mainland where the slope is less and that barrier island can then be higher. So, and most people don't know this, Orrin Pilkey, who co-wrote this book back in 1978, wrote a famous book called The Beaches Are Moving, because most people didn't know that barrier islands are
Everything
moving.
is moving in this planet. Actually, if you, it depends just the time span that we are analyzing, right? Because if you're just looking at a river, you clearly see the erosions on one band and the deposition on the inner band. And if you see like a cartography of previous centuries, you see that very well. Actually, there are fights against some countries that are fighting because their borders are moving.
Right.
And there are not only rivers, but also mountains, like Chile and Argentina. Sometimes it rains more on one side, there's more erosion, and so the boundary moves.
And I just read an article that said that because snow and ice are melting on mountains, a lot of these mountains are now rising. They actually remeasured mountains, and it's not very much. It may be only a couple inches, but the mountains are actually rebounding because they don't have that weight of the frozen water on top of them.
In the Himalayas, in Nepal and north of India, where you have also that for the elevation of the mountains is also creating way more erosion and creating more sediments that are brought by the rivers into the floodplain and the sea. So yeah, everything is moving. Even the mountains. The mountains, they form because they move. Every earthquake, they move a few inches if the earthquakes are pretty tough.
And so, for humans, that's hard to accept because, if we're lucky, we live to be 80, 90 years old, and then we die. And so our perspective is like maybe that far. And we may think about our children and our grandchildren, but, a lot of times we're gone and they have to live their lives. So we have a short perspective geologically. Geologically, and even this is young. If you look back 5,000 years, scientists can actually trace how Galveston Island has moved, right, from where it was 5,000 years ago. It has moved toward the mainland. So our short perspective, because of our short lifespan, can work against us in understanding these geological processes and how they work. And one of them you mentioned was hurricanes. And, hurricanes hitting Houston, usually we don't get a hurricane. I think the average is about once every 20 years, Now, we did have Ike, and then we had Harvey. But Harvey actually came in down, toward Rockport, and then kind of moved as even though it was a hurricane or a tropical storm, I think it degraded a little. It continued to have some of its force over the water and kept pulling up water and kept dumping water and raining on us for 3-4 days. So we don't get hurricanes that often, but when we do get them, because of our short perspective, we have forgotten. 20 years ago, I have been through Hurricane Carla. I was 9 years old at the time. I've been through Alicia. I have been through Allison, which really wasn't a hurricane. I have been through Ike, and there were a couple other minor hurricanes that hit the Texas coast too. And then I have been through Harvey. So So in my lifetime, I've been through, let's say, 5, right? And I'm 65 years old. So hurricanes don't happen very often, and we forget about them.
Before moving into the hurricanes, I would like to ask you that you talk about the rules of the sea. So do we really live by the rules of the sea, or we don't live them at all?
Well, it's kind of obvious, and I use an example. You know how Meyerland has flooded 3 times in a row, 2015, 2016, and then 2017. Certain parts of Meyerland that were flooding in these past 3 years were also flooding in the 70s. So we're not learning from our experiences. If we flooded back in the 70s and we're still rebuilding essentially the same houses to the same height and getting flooded out again and again and again, we're not learning what we should be learning, whether it's the rules of the sea or the rules of the rain or whatever you wish to call them.
The rules of the reason.
The rules of nature, let's say.
Are you suggesting that we should move away from Houston?
I am suggesting that the 100-year floodplain is not a place to build. And in some cases, the way we're looking, if indeed climate change occurs as many scientists feel it is, which means more rainfalls, more intense rainfalls, maybe more hurricanes, more intense hurricanes, and rising sea level, then maybe even the 500-year floodplain is not sufficient. And so, from my perspective, and this is just my thought, if you're living in Houston and you're not 3 to 6 feet off the ground, it seems to me you're probably in danger. It's interesting. Ed Wolf, who's a big developer and who lives in Meyerland and got flooded out, I think the city is now saying that the people in Meyerland need to go up about 3 feet or something like that. Ed Wolf is going up 6 feet. Ed doesn't want to ever flood again as long as he's alive, right? And he's got the money to do it. But all you got to do is drive down South Bracewood and look at some of the new homes, and they're like 4 to 5 feet up because under the new regulations, they're making people raise them. And so, but we keep flooding and we keep rebuilding and flooding and rebuilding, and so maybe nature is trying to tell us something, And yes, it's going to take a long time to buy out properties in the 100-year floodplain, but these properties eventually will become flood control properties that we can sort of shape to contain even more water. Recreational properties, everybody loves, hike and bike trails and trees and everything along Braze Bayou or wherever you live. And there'll be places where people are out of harm's way instead of being in harm's way. I mean, we've, like over in the Greens Point area, we had entire apartment complexes that weren't just in the floodplain. They were in the floodway, which is the most dangerous part of the floodplain. So why did we allow that for all these decades and years and years? Why did we allow people to build, or developers to build, within what I will call the footprint of the Addicks and Barker reservoirs? Why did we allow people downstream to build when we knew that if we had a really crisis situation and we thought those dams were going to maybe fail, we're going to pull up the gates and we're going to let that water down like we had to do, and we're going to flood a lot of people? Why did we keep allowing people to build in those areas? And so if we don't learn from that today, from what happened in Harvey, and we also have people, I now live in Kingwood, I used to live in the southwest part of Houston. People out there are all concerned because part of Kingwood flooded that's right next to Lake Houston. And they're blaming the San Jacinto River Authority who was releasing water because their dam is not a flood control dam. And they got to a certain point, they said, we need to release. So if we don't learn from those things, that maybe some people are in harm's way and we need to get them out, then we're going to repeat the same mistake. People are going to die. People are going to get injured. The property is going to be destroyed again and again, and we're going to pay for it.
Brandt, focusing on Hurricane Harvey that you were already talking about, what is, according to you, the things that they went wrong What is the worst thing that happened in hurricane? Because obviously we have some loss and we lost some of our citizens in here. But I mean structurally and organizational-wise. What was the worst thing that happened? And I also like to know what is that went right, because we didn't have a catastrophe, and we didn't have, if the dikes and the dams they were like really breaking apart, that would have been a really
obviously the Addicks and Barker dams, even though they weren't built to hold back that kind of water, they worked in that they didn't break down, right? So we can be thankful that they didn't fail, because if they had failed, we would have had a much, much higher level of water coming down Buffalo Bayou and flooding into downtown Houston. In fact, the reason they were built back in, the late 30s and early 40s was because in the 20s and the 30s we had those kinds of rains, and they went down Buffalo Bayou, and downtown Houston was underwater twice at least. So we're glad they didn't fail. What didn't work was we had allowed people to build in that footprint of the dam where everybody thought, well, we'll never get there, But we had the rain, and it wasn't just a rain in one spot. It was a regional rain that reached, let's say, from West Harris County all the way to the Louisiana border, right, of 30 to 50 inches or 60 inches. And so we reached that point where the water rose and it went around the side of the dam, because these dams on the side are not built up and they're not fully connected. They're sort of like sloped down, and those people got flooded. And so what went wrong was, why did we allow developers to develop those properties?
Brent, now we know how.
Or one of the things that went wrong. Okay.
Yeah. Are there any others that you want to mention?
Well, sure. I mean, downstream too. Why did we allow so many people to not just be in the floodplain but in the floodway, and be flooded out repeatedly and still allow them to rebuild? At some point we all want to say, I have my rights, but at some point you have to say the rights of the community as a whole oversee yours, and you're in too dangerous a place, and we need to buy you out so you can go somewhere where you're safe. We don't like to talk about that, but because we usually offer voluntary buyouts, but sometimes you even need to do condemnation, because you want to get those people out. You want them to be safe. You don't want them to stay in a place where they could lose their lives as well as their property, and you don't want that.
Hurricanes are nature's way of providing ecological change in our coastal ecosystems, right? So to keep them healthy.
Right.
Do you want to interact with me and see what are these good feedbacks and positive actions of the hurricanes? Like?
Sure. One of them is like, I can't tell you how many times when Texas has had a hurricane and it's come in like Corpus Christi or the Valley or something, they've been having a drought. So their drought disappears immediately.
So hurricanes, they break droughts.
They can break droughts.
And then bring back vegetation.
And bring back vegetation. Hurricanes also can flush out sediments and organic matter and things of those nature. And that can have several positive things. They can kind of reshape environments so that marshes and other things can repopulate those, so you get a sort of a new generation of vegetation and ecosystem. They can also, by putting all that organic matter, let's say in Galveston Bay, that helps feed the production of critters that we really love because we like to eat them, like shrimp. Okay.
yeah. And then they expand the biosphere down into the deep water, because when you bring nutrients,
right,
which is not the organic matter but also the minerals that they act as nutrients, then you allow new.
You're fertilizing the upper ocean waters, for instance, or even the coastal waters.
Then we have a drop in temperature.
Yes, and that.
This is good for corals.
Yes.
Which we have.
Well, we do. Flower Garden Banks National Marine Sanctuary, and also other topographical highs in the Gulf, have these corals or coral-like sponge ecosystems.
While in general, also hurricanes, what they do is they redistribute very quickly the temperature from the equator to the poles, and so they kind of
right. In fact, I've got a quote here I want to read to you. This is from the most recent issue of Texas Shores, which is the Texas Sea Grant College program put out by Texas A&M. And so they were talking about Hurricane Harvey, and they quoted somebody who was very famous about oysters. Sammy Ray, Dr. Sammy Ray was a leading authority in oysters, and he passed away a few years ago. But what he said was this: people look at floods as disasters. But in my opinion, if I could control things, I'd have a good flood every 8 to 10 years to clean out the parasites, dealing with oysters. So hurricanes help clean out those oyster predators and parasites so that we can have great oysteries so we can eat great oysters. So we can be thankful for hurricanes for that too.
And then hurricanes, they draw up cool water from the deep Gulf of Mexico. This is hampering the creation of more hurricanes.
Right.
Right.
Exactly. And also they can spread seeds, and...
oh, right, sure. Pollens and seeds that they travel with the
Sure,
winds.
Like mangroves are a good example where they can push those mangrove seeds into areas where they can populate. And, mangroves are famous for being nursery areas for finfish and...
And when the winds they are too strong and there are like trees that they are falling, well, these falling trees, they leave more space for younger and stronger plants.
Sure. That's what they call vegetation succession, changes the vegetation, which sort of alters and sort of resets the time clock so that new plants can come in. And they provide new habitats, and so more critters come in and that sort of thing.
And as you already mentioned, right, the presence of hurricanes, they erode the seaward side of the barrier islands, and they drop the sediment on the back of the barrier.
On the base side. And
allowing the barrier to survive the sea level rise.
And also allowing salt marshes to be created there, which are nursery areas for all those fishes that we love to eat.
And then the runoff of the rivers, as you say, they flushes out all of these minerals that they become nutrients, and they kind of fertilize the bays, the estuaries, as you say, the Gulf of Mexico.
So, and it's really important. Most people don't know these things, so I can certainly understand why people fear hurricanes and are worried about hurricanes. But it's also important to put hurricanes into perspective and see that hurricanes aren't just evil. Hurricanes actually aren't human at all. They're just natural phenomena. But they create conditions so that a lot of times they are beneficial to us, but at a different point in time.
And so in the end, about protecting the coastal areas in general. So this is a rhetoric question. So should we construct more dikes and levees and gates, or plan the so-called planned withdrawal? So buyouts by the government, maybe also industrial areas.
It will depend. First of all, we have sea level rise. We know that's going to happen probably for several centuries, maybe 1,000 years. We don't fully know how long sea level rise is going to occur, but we think it's going to be a long time. So whatever we do today, we've got to look to the future and say, does this kind of make sense? So we need a longer viewpoint. A lot of times our viewpoint is just a decade or so ahead. We're probably going to need 100, 200-year viewpoint to start thinking about, well, what's going to happen in 200 years? So that's one thing. And then another thing is that I forgot your question.
Well, I said it's a rhetoric question, but you're really...
a planned withdrawal.
Granulating that. Yeah, it's like constructing more or planning a withdrawal.
Some places like along the Houston Ship Channel where we have a lot of petrochemical plants and refineries and stuff, it may be best to put some some sort of levee system around those, and also the communities there. In other places, it probably makes more sense. For instance, I'm just using this as an example, Bolivar Peninsula. That's a very, very fragile, very exposed, vulnerable area. That's probably best to have the construction, as little construction as possible, more land bought for natural ecosystems. People who do live there already are living like on 18-foot stilts, right? And so to me that kind of makes some sense, that you're not going to invest a whole lot of money in protecting 18-foot stilt houses, especially since many of them are leased or rented or second homes or that sort of thing. Whereas, if you got a Houston Ship Channel, you might look at that differently. So you might look site-specifically at different areas and decide to do different things at those different areas.
So we were here today with Brandt Mannchen. Brandt, thank you so very much for all of your information and for your different point of view, different from the mainstream. I like that you talk about the benefits of the hurricanes, the benefit of the fires, and you gave us this holistic view on mitigation, not just mitigating specific sites, but the entire island, if you are looking at the island.
Right, exactly.
And also I like the perspective of the time spans that we take in consideration. Like you say, the barrier islands, they move like rivers, they move, and meanders, they migrate, but you just simply need a different time span to take into consideration. So, and then the rules of the sea, something that we want to read about and to think about, the rules of the sea. Brandt Mannchen from Sierra Club talk about them. He also wrote a short article. And you, dear audience, you may listen to this show again in the minigeology.com, which is the YouTube channel. You can write me at minigeology@gmail.com, and you can tweet at minigeology. So I hope that you enjoy this show with the Sierra Club. So after organizations from Petroleum Geology and several CEOs or representations of associations related to the geology, we had here somebody more interested into the environment, which is another important topic, not only associated with geology, but with this region where we are living. Okay, Brandt, thank you very much, and we're going to welcome you again.
Thank you, Daniel. Really appreciate it.
When a couple live over to the side of the road, just like the time before and the time before that. In Patterson, that's just the way things go. If you're black, you might as well not show up on the street unless you want to dry the heat. Alfred Bello had a partner and he had a rap for the cops. Him and Isaac Dexter Bradley were just out prowling around. Saw two men running out, they looked like middleweights. They jumped into a white car without a state plates. And Miss Patty Valentine just nodded her head. Cop said, wait a minute, boys, this one's not dead. So they took him to the Edinburgh